Welcome to video number 2 of our Economic Transformations unit. Today we're going to talk about reform, because if you remember from our last video, you have this immigration movement coming into the United States. You have these nativists who are now kind of pushing back against them. And then you also have these kind of low income, low quality housing in these cities. And so it's going to start to make people kind of sit up and take notice and think, the world is not quite what we want it to be. And so there's going to be a lot of reform that comes out of the mid and late 1800s. And so for today, we're going to talk about some of those reform movements, everything from women's rights to the Second Great Awakening and a number of other reform movements that happened around this time. In your notes, you need to list this as Reforming America. This is video number 2 in our series. And one of the first things we want to talk about is the Great Awakening, or actually really the Second Great Awakening. Because if you remember, last year we talked about kind of the Great Awakening and Winthrop and kind of the idea that there's this new birth of religious ideas. And so in the mid-1800s, the Second Great Awakening was a religious revival movement in the early 19th century. And like the Great Awakening, the original one, with millions of supporters, preachers in this movement really tried to challenge the way the world worked, and that's what the way society was developed. And so some of the things they really challenged were traditional Protestant views on religion. They encouraged an emotional attachment to religion, that you should genuinely feel your love for your faith. They emphasized the power of each man, rather than the churches and priests and rulers, to control one's own soul and salvation. So what they're saying is really, you don't have to go to a priest or a preacher or go confess your sins. You can just be the person who you are and have that connection and that faith. And that alone should help get you into heaven. They also taught of personal responsibility, of kind of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and taking responsibility for your own actions. And the whole goal is they want to improve the world around them. They don't like what they're seeing, and they think that the world is on a bad track. And so they really want to change the way the world is working. So these Second Great Awakening principles really kind of quickly spread outside of religion. It's hard. They don't exist within a vacuum. It's hard for people to sit by and listen to what these preachers are saying and not think we can do this too. And so many Americans, particularly the middle class women, who had time and money to spare for the first time, developed a real spirit of reform. The popularity of the reform movement was so great that in the 1820s, to 1860s became known as the Age of Reform. And so some of those major reforms included the temperance movement, for instance, which really, this blamed society's problems on liquor and wanted a ban on alcohol. There's also the prison reform movement. This was led by a woman by the name of Dorothea Dix, and was encouraged the creation of mental institutions so that the mentally ill wouldn't be imprisoned with criminals anymore. She also pushed for the juvenile justice system to be reformed, and really becomes a major player in the reform movement of the prison system. And that starts to get us our first mental hospitals in these big buildings that really work on people's mental health instead of just locking them up and throwing away the key. This reform movement also extends to education, and it included the creation of the first teachers' training schools, also called normal schools, by Catherine at this time. So teachers finally can learn the trade themselves. Catherine Beecher's first all-girls school appears at this time, as does Samuel Gridley Howe's School for the Blind, which was attended by Helen Keller. Thomas Gallaudet School for the Deaf also occurred at this time, and Gallaudet University is still around today and is a major school for the deaf. The expansion of public education and the founding of liberal arts colleges, including Oberlin College in Ohio, which became the first college to admit women and African Americans, all really embody this spirit of reform and change and growth that's coming about in the mid to late 1800s. Now at the same time, there's women's rights movements that are going on, and women really become a major part of the abolitionist movement, which we'll save for a later discussion when we talk about the Civil War. But understand that women are as much a part of the abolitionist movement as they are any other movement. But around the same time, the women's rights movement was also solidifying, and many supporters of abolition, such as the Grimke sisters, Sojourner Truth, and Frederick Douglass, who actually are in this picture, also wanted equality of the sexes. At this time, women could not vote, Most weren't educated. They didn't even receive equal pay for equal work. And if they did earn money, it belonged to their husbands or their fathers. In 1840, though, Elizabeth Cady Stanton tried to attend an abolitionist convention in London. But her and other women weren't allowed to participate. She and her friend Lucretia Mott decided to organize a women's rights convention. The Seneca Falls Convention in July of 1848 really became kind of the first rallying cry for change. It was the first meeting of its kind in the world, and activists drafted something known as the Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions. And if you visit the memorial today in Seneca Falls, there's a long panel wall that stretches along the next to the original meeting site, and it's actually etched into it. It was based on the Declaration of Independence, and it was meant to lay out the injustices in gender relations. For example, it stated that all men and women are created equal. Women didn't get the right to vote for another 70 years. The two pillars, the things that really hold this movement, the women's rights movement up, were abolition and temperance. And remember, abolition is the freedom of slaves, and temperance is the abolishment of alcohol. Women could relate to the status of slaves. They saw that alcohol abuse led to domestic issues. So they saw slavery as what they could empathize with that. They could see what other people were going through, what the slaves were going through, and they could feel their pain. And then they also, could see marital abuse and job loss as a result of alcohol. And so it was really the two biggest things they really wanted to get rid of. Two individuals in particular who are really some of the loudest people at this time for women's rights and for change are Lucy Stone, who became a spokesman for the Anti-Slavery Society, and Susan B. Anthony, who encouraged New York State to pass laws allowing women to own property. The abolitionist movement and the women's rights movement had common roots, but they disagreed over which had greater priority. And so that's it for today. Remember those big movements in particular. The Second Great Awakening really tries to change religion. Those ideas of reform spread to society. The temperance movement grows out of this time. The abolitionist movement grows out of this time. And the women's rights movement grows out of this time. There's a lot of key figures here like Frederick Douglass, Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony that you're going to want to make sure you remember and maybe go back and highlight in your notes. If you need to, pause this, go back and watch those sections again because this is crucial to the reform movement, these individuals. Homework for tonight. 2 essay questions that could come from these notes. Develop your own, have them at the bottom of your notes. If you have any other questions, make sure you write those over in the margins. Other than that, good job. You've made it now through 2 videos. We're rolling right along. And if you have any other questions, please come see me either before class, after class, or even during class. I'm here for you. Until tomorrow, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye-bye.